I think I should take some time to remind you of how to remember these different things. And I guess the way that I remember the different trig functions, I sort of use 3 different relationships to help me remember. So I guess I use 3 relationships. Okay. The first relationship I use is that co-derivatives are negative. So what do I mean by co-derivatives? I mean cosine theta, cosine x, cosecant x, and cotangent x. These are all have negative derivatives. Okay. The second idea that I use is I use the idea that there's 3 shapes. I'm kind of a visual person, so I think of things in terms of shapes. So one type of shape is it's just a single trig function. The second type of shape we have is that it's the product of 2 trig functions. And then the third type of shape we have is it's some trig function squared. So those are the 3 different shapes that we have. Okay. The third type of thing, the way that I remember it, and I'm certain this is only me, but I think of the sort of what I call cousins, or cousin relationships. So what do I mean by that? I mean that sine of x and cosine of x, these guys are cousins. Okay. Secant x and cosecant x, these guys are also cousins. And tangent of x and cotangent of x, these guys are all cousins as well. Okay. So now that I told you that I'm working with these 3 types of relationships, let's write down our trig functions and let's find the derivative of each one of those. So if you have the derivative of sine of x, you have the derivative of cosine of x, and then we're going to have the derivative of tangent of x. And then what I'm going to do on the left, I'm going to put the reciprocal of each one. So the reciprocal of sine is cosecant of x. The reciprocal of cosine is secant of x. And the reciprocal of tangent is cotangent of x. Okay. So let me just remind you of how I realize I'm totally repeating the video lecture, but I think this is important enough that I should go over it again. So the derivative of any co-thing is negative. So that means that this derivative is negative, this derivative is negative, and this derivative is negative. Does that make sense to you all? There's 2 functions that have just a single trig function as its derivative. So those shapes are sine and cosine. Okay. There's 2 functions that are the product of 2 of the trig functions, and those guys are cosecant and secant. And there's 2 functions that have that squared shape, and that's tangent and cotangent. Okay. So now I want to figure out what are each of those little blobs. And here's where the cousin relationship comes in. So sine and cosine are cousins. They're related to each other's derivatives. So the derivative of sine is cosine, and the derivative of cosine is negative sine of x. So do you see how cousins have their related derivatives. Okay. If I were to look at the tangent one next, the tangent one is going to be secant squared x. So you got to memorize that one. But if you look, the secant and cosecant are cousins. So when I look at the derivative of cotangent of x, this guy is just going to be negative cosecant squared x. So you could see that tangent and cotangent are cousins, and their derivatives are also cousins. Or their derivatives have cousins related. Okay. These last two guys, the product ones, product of two trig functions, these guys have their own derivatives inside of them. So the first part of the derivative cosecant is negative cosecant. And the first part of secant is secant x. Then when I want to fill in the rest of it, it's secant x times tangent x. And this is cosecant x times cotangent x. So I hope you can see that like these two pieces are cousins and they fit with different derivatives. So these are the basic trig derivatives that I need you to know. Does anyone have any questions about this?